Many people have had paranormal experiences at the Windsor Hotel in Georgia, and I didn't believe in ghosts when my classmates and I arrived there a couple years back to stage a musical for the local town. However, I quickly changed my mind that same night. This experience truly changed my perspective on ghosts and the paranormal in general. There were 4 witnesses to these events, including myself, and I promise all of this is true. It's the only ghost story I tell, and one that I've looked back on all these years. So me and 3 other classmates were actually assigned to purportedly haunted hotel room. I don't recall how we found out. I believe we found a newspaper clipping online that referenced our room as haunted, curious to see if such an old hotel was haunted. It was. Apparently, a mother and a little girl died in our room, and the girl's favorite song was Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. We decided to sing it at midnight just for kicks. I thought it'd be funny scaring my friends, and there was somewhat of a thrill being in a supposedly haunted room. We sang it at the stroke of midnight 3 times. As soon as we finished the last verse, the entire hotel's World War II style fire alarm goes off, scaring the shit out of all of us. I ran out of my room in my boxers, to be perfectly honest. The firefighters arrived to do a quick check. There's no fire. They claim the source of alarm originated in our room. The principal believed that we were smoking, or we were messing around, but all of us kept trying to convince him that it was a ghost, and I believe it was. Too big of a coincidence that right after we finished the song, the fire alarm goes off in the whole hotel, and that the source of the fire originated in our room. I take this as a coincidence if we didn't sing the song again the next night. We didn't wait for midnight the night after. We sang the song earlier, though it was still dark. This time, we only had to sing the song twice, and we heard a sharp crack. We look around, trying to find out what made the noise. My roommate pulls aside the curtain, and half the window is cracked in half. This did it for me. I was terrified, and 2 of my roommates were crying. Our teachers didn't allow us to change rooms, as the whole hotel was booked anyways. We didn't sing the song again. I believe these events were too coincidental to not be influenced by the paranormal. My math teacher believed the window cracking was due to the expanding and contracting of the glass due to fluctuating temperature. But I don't buy that, especially since it happened right after we sang the song. Number 4. I'm a soldier in the United States Army, and I'm currently a little over halfway through a deployment in Iraq. About a month ago, they sent a couple guys from my platoon home for various reasons. Gym-related injuries, family tragedies, children being born, etc. So this left us a bit short-handed. I ended up with an extra guard shift at the motor pool, which is a big parking lot for military vehicles, from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. 4 rolls around. Our replacements show up, and we're relieved right on time. I grab my weapon and head back to my room. I had just passed through the small opening in the T-wall barrier, and was about 50 meters from the shack I was staying in, when something caught my eye on the cement sidewalk in front of me. I stopped dead in my tracks. In front of me, about 30 feet or so, was a black and white cat. I don't know why, but the sight of it caused me to jump, and for some reason, I was just afraid. Not typical like, oh shit kind of fear, but more of an overwhelming anxiety or paranoia. The cat just sat there, and didn't move, but looked directly at me. Then I noticed something a little odd. I have a cat back in the States, who's the absolute light of my life. A black cat with white paws, a white chest, and a little sliver of white running down the length of his face. This cat looked exactly like mine. Now, obviously I knew that it wasn't, but the sight of a familiar-looking feline friend was enough for me to somewhat relax the jumpy feeling I had previously felt. I took about 3 steps forward, slung my rifle to my side, and crouched down with one arm outstretched in an attempt to coax the cat to come over. My lips pursed when I became completely paralyzed with fear. From my eye level, standing at about 6 feet, to my eye level crouching at about 3 feet, the animal I was seeing looked completely different, as if my visual perspective completely changed the appearance of the animal. Like one of those optical illusion perspective-based art sculptures. What I was looking at no longer looked like a cat, but a large, broad dog-like animal, crouched with its head lowered just inches off the ground. All rationality abandoned me at this point, and all I could do was stare back at whatever it was. I couldn't make out much of a face. The only light source around was from a street lamp, about 50 meters behind me past the T-wall. What I was able to make out were its eyes, which I could see clearer than daylight, and they were human. Look into a mirror, and open your eyes as wide as you possibly can. That's pretty much what I was looking at. It just stared at me, and I stared back. I will tell you now that I have never been more terrified in my entire life. I slowly stood back up, half expecting whatever I was looking at to take on the appearance of a cat once again, but it didn't. The thing did not move a fucking inch through this whole encounter. At this point, my weapon wasn't even enough to make me feel safe. I backed away slowly, all the while keeping my eyes on what was in front of me. I had just about reached the gap in the T-wall again when the thing just disappeared. It didn't back away and vanish into the shadows. It just kind of steadily wasn't there anymore. But right before it vanished entirely, I heard what sounded like a low, but somehow loud, guttural growling noise that resonated off the T-walls surrounding the area with the rooms. Needless to say, as soon as I passed back through the T-wall, I fucking bolted. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, with all my gear on, to my team leader's room across the gravel road. I took a moment to calm myself before entering his room. I slept on his floor that night, blaming it on the fact that we had to get up early and the alarm on my phone hadn't been working lately. I haven't seen anything since then, but every other night or so, when I'm by myself, I'll get that same horribly overwhelming sense of anxiety and paranoia that I got when I first saw the thing. If anyone has any information on what this might have been, or what may have happened, it would be greatly appreciated. If you have any questions about anything I may have failed to cover or left out, feel free to ask, and I'll answer as best I can.
Number 3.
I grew up on this island called Rendova in the Solomon Islands, which was completely isolated due to lack of modern technology. I lived with my grandmother, who was considered to be able to talk to spirits. Many weird things happened when I was growing up, but this is my most vivid story I remember. We had a little farm to grow our cassava and taro, and my grandmother and I went up nearly every day to work on it and harvest food for dinner. I was only 4 at the time, but I was my grandmother's little helper. At one point, my grandmother noticed that some of our crops were missing and decided to plant our ancestral ginger there. This ginger, as weird as it sounds, is said to have a demon we used to sacrifice, which then protects us. She planted it there to ensure whoever was stealing our crops would get caught. One afternoon, we are sitting at our leaf hut, and this man comes down from the path of our little farm. He is shivering. Mind you, this is the Pacific, so it's extremely hot, and is disoriented. My grandmother at this point realized that he was the one who stole our crops, and decides to help him, and hopefully he learns his lesson. She orders me to make a fire, and I start making one, while she goes and gets the man to sit him next to the fire. He is still shivering next to the fire, and so I get blankets and cover him, but he is still cold. My grandmother and I sit next to him, and she starts talking, but not to him. She says something along the lines of, "It's time to come out now. Leave him alone." I never forgot how the man replied. It was the most demonic, low-sounding voice I had heard in my life. And the man replied with, "I don't want to come out. He's mine now." So at this point I'm beyond scared, and my grandmother tells me to go get my uncles to come and hold him down. I go and get them, and they hold the man down in a laying down position. My grandmother then starts doing a pulling motion just above the man's body, and he starts screaming. My grandmother keeps going regardless of the scream, and repeats the process for about half an hour. Eventually, the man collapses, and my grandmother says she has to go into the forest to finish the rest of the ritual. She instructs me to stay with the man until he wakes up and give him some stew, so I do. The man wakes up and is completely confused to where he is. I ask him if he remembers anything, and all he said was he remembers intense pain. I send him off on his way back to his home village, and my grandmother comes back a bit later with the ginger she has to plant. Nevertheless, the man learned his lesson and never stole from us again.
Number 2.
Bit of an odd situation, but this is 100% true. When I was younger, 13 or 14, I attempted to take my own life on the second floor of my old home. I was a very emotional teenager. Thinking back now, I can't really remember what was the last straw. But that day, I decided to take a knife from our kitchen and walked up the stairs. Our second floor was incomplete at the time. Wooden floors, but no beds, furniture, or electricity. I had used the second floor as sort of a quiet place to go to listen to music, practice my guitar, etc. Long story short, I began to cut through my wrists in typical emo kid fashion, but I ended up crying through it, sobering up, and sort of just walked back down the stairs, and kept living. Now the odd part, I never told anybody about it. I love my mother, and telling her at the time would have been devastating to her, especially since after that moment, I seemed to be getting better. However, a few months passed, and my mother ran to my room downstairs one afternoon, pale as ever. She seemed frightened, and sort of blurted out that she saw a ghost. My mother has never believed in ghosts, so her pale look meant she was 100% certain. She said she was cleaning the room beneath the second floor, in the area next to the stairs, when she saw a young boy appear from the corner of her eye. The boy takes a few steps away from the stairs and disappears. She said she called my name to it, believing it was me, but freaked out and ran when it vanished into thin air. Immediately, I thought back to my attempted suicide. I finally shared my story with her. It had been a few years now, and she was very understanding. She mentioned the spirit had my old look, longer hair, and a very sort of depressed walk. It startled me. I made a few attempts to go back upstairs, but I never saw anything, and never found a reason to go back up there. Again, a few months pass. I graduate high school, and I move out. I'm now living on my own, but my mom mentions this apparition from time to time. She still sees it. In similar fashion, the apparition walks down the stairs, takes a few steps towards our living room, and vanishes. I'm posting this now because Mom shared a new point of view during the holidays. She came up for a visit. I don't enjoy going down to our old home since it makes me feel uncomfortable, and I never seem to be able to sleep in my old room. Now, my mother finally completed the second floor this last year, and she's renting it out to a coworker who carpools with her. Apparently, a few weeks back, the coworker mentioned a kid that seems to haunt the upstairs. He said he always does the same thing. He's knelt down on the floor, gets up, walks across the entire room slowly, then walks down the stairs. I haven't met her coworker yet, but Mom said she showed him an old photograph of me, and the guy laughed it off, saying he was positive the spirit was me. Mom asked him if he'd like a different room to sleep in, but he doesn't seem concerned. He says the spirit has never tried to communicate or hurt him, so he just sees him from time to time and it's become routine. I'm not sure what to make of it. I always thought the paranormal was spirits of dead people or demonic entities of some sort, but I am very much alive, and apparently roam the second floor of my old house from time to time. It kind of weirds me out. Mom has mentioned I must go back someday to confront the spirit, but I truly have no idea what I'd say, or what I'd do if I ever saw it.
Number 1.
This has haunted me for a long time. I was about 19 or 20 at the time, and I was living in Savannah, Georgia. I drank a lot. I had a crappy fake ID. I worked this terrible job as a grunt laborer. The kind where you go to those temp labor agencies like AbleBody and Labor Finders. I'd show up at 4 a.m., work until 5 p.m., and drink myself to sleep after only taking home maybe $60 for the day. I was supposed to go into work this particular morning, but I decided to skip. It's a labor agency. They'll just find somebody else. I called the girlfriend and tell her I want to go to Tybee Beach. I had already started drinking. She comes over. We hop in my big ugly van, pack up some rods, and head to the beach. I decided to have a drink across from the beach at this little bar. This is where the story gets interesting. Shortly after ordering my drink, I get this really weird feeling. I become hyper aware of my surroundings. The door opens, and I see this guy walk in out of my peripheral vision. There was a seat between me and my girlfriend, but the bar was empty. It was like 9 a.m. He could have sat anywhere else, but he chooses to sit right between her and I. Then, he starts doing this thing with his fingers. The bar top was reflective, and he takes his fingers like two little legs and starts walking with them, skating with them on top of the counter. This isn't something out of the ordinary, but I took notice because when I was in school, I did that all the time. I pretended I had rollerblades on my fingers and that I was skating around my desk. I hated school and was always distracting myself, so I became kind of mesmerized for some reason. That's when he looks at me, and in this really thick kind of Germanic or Nordic accent, he says, "I notice you're a man who pays attention to detail. I'm also a man who pays attention to detail." Now, before I continue, I have to describe this guy. He had this short, spiky hair that was bleached at the tips, kind of like a late 90s style. He had really expensive clothes on, like a nice Prada leather jacket, designer jeans, and really nice boots. He seemed like a kind of gay guy with awesome fashion sense and really distinctive taste. I always remember this because I think to myself, some weird homeless crazy guy couldn't have afforded those clothes. The other thing that stuck out was his eyes. They were piercing gray. It reminded me of like a husky's eyes, but his pupils just stayed this disturbing pinpoint size. They were just extremely small, which caused his look to be kind of terrifying. His teeth were normal, right? But not at the same time. I don't know how to explain it. They were sharper than they should be, as if they were filed slightly. His hands were normal, but his fingernails were slightly long and pointed, as if he deliberately did it. And he kept licking his teeth too, as if he were salivating. The thing about this guy is that you look at him and everything seems normal, but off at the same time. So you're questioning if you're crazy for thinking this. This guy then begins to start talking about the relationship between me and my girlfriend, but really strangely. He's talking about how beautiful she is, and how I should pay more attention to her. I was kind of a dick to her. Shortly after he began talking like this, I had this almost knowing feeling come over me. Like, I knew this guy was not human. I look at my girlfriend and say, "You need to leave." She just kind of looks at me like she knows too. Without a word of protest, she gets up quietly and leaves. Later, I learned that she went next door to get a coffee. That's when this guy literally says to me with the utmost confidence, "You were supposed to go fishing today." He points at the beach across the street. "If you had, I would have drowned you in that ocean." And I shit you not, he fucking hissed. Again, for some reason, this overwhelming calm had come over me. I just ask, "Who are you?" He answers back with this crazy guttural language. It sounded Arabic or Hebrew or something. I just, for some reason, without skipping a beat, and I have no idea why I was so calm to this day, ask, "Say it in a way that I can understand." He says, "You can call me Jimmy C. I jumped off the San Francisco Bridge years ago, and we've been watching you." From there on out, he never referred to himself as me or I, but only we. The conversation became something very strange after this. He keeps buying me drinks too, specifically whiskey sours. It was like he had an endless supply of money. After I don't know how long, I told him I'm going to leave. I walk next door, I get my girlfriend, and she's stone silent. We start driving home, then I just ask, "Do you know what that was?" And she just says, "That was a demon." This girl had parents that were scientists. She was really analytical, completely non-religious, and that was the first thing she said out of her mouth. Now, I didn't say this part before, because to me, this is the most important aspect of the story, so I'll say it now, because it's what happened after this that has screwed me up for fucking years. The last thing this Jimmy C guy said to me before I left is this: "Look at my car." I look outside, and I see one of those newer Volkswagen Beetles. It was white. "What does the license plate say?" I look at the plate, and it literally says Fierce. He looks me dead in the eyes and says, "The next time you see me, I'll be driving a black Mercedes, and the license plate will say Utopia." That night, I was still calm. I don't know why. I felt like that guy on Office Space after his hypnotherapist died right in front of him and he was weirdly zen. But my girlfriend started having terrible nightmares of this guy's head just staring at her in her dreams. Weeks went by, and that's when the encounter started affecting me. I found myself becoming paranoid about that black fucking Mercedes. Every black car I saw, I checked if it was a Mercedes. If it was, I immediately looked at the license plate. I started doing it when I watched TV or movies as well. I couldn't stop. Now, I'm going to fast forward a bit. About 10 years go by. I'm 29, so this is just recently. And in silence, when I'm alone, when I'm drinking, I often think about this encounter. I still look at black Mercedes every time they passed, but I'm not so much anxious about it anymore as I am curious. And I remember that my girlfriend at the time always kept a journal. By now I'm pretty sure that I'm insane. Maybe I was drunk, maybe I'm not remembering any of this correctly. After years of trying to find news articles of a Jimmy C that committed suicide off the San Francisco Bridge, looking at black cars and so on, I feel like I'd grown out of it. Yet, I still had to know. So last year, I tracked down my ex-girlfriend. We ended on bad terms. I find out that she's a school teacher in Wisconsin, has married a woman, and is actually trying to have a child. I figure she's not going to talk to me, but I send her a Facebook message anyway. I ask her if she can find the journal from that day, because I had to know if her events line up with mine. Sure enough, she had it, and it contained even more detail than what I remembered, because she had literally written it at the coffee shop next door right after it happened. When I read what she had written, literally that day, I knew that I wasn't imagining the details wrong, that this actually happened. This is probably the single most frustrating and scary thing that has ever happened to me. I want to imagine it's just a normal crazy guy, but unless you saw it and felt it and heard him talk about all the little details of what you were supposed to do that day, when only you knew, you just can't understand the impact of it. It's been 10 years, and my only solace really is that my ex-girlfriend was there to corroborate. That communication, where I reached out to her, actually caused us to be on good terms again after a decade. It seems to have been something that bothered her just as much as it bothered me. And still, to this day, even though I'm living 10,000 miles away in Southeast Asia, I can't stop looking for that car. I can't stop thinking about Jimmy C's twisted face. I wonder if he still crawls on my back, and if the fear I feel at night, often to where I must drink myself to sleep or find a one-night stand just so I don't feel alone, is him or them watching me.